When you finally give up on an avoidant, the first thing that changes is not them. It's the emotional pressure in the connection. And pressure is the exact trigger that made them run in the first place. Most people think avoidants come back because they suddenly realize your value, like a movie scene. Sometimes that happens, but the deeper reason is nervous system physics. When you stop chasing, the system calms. When the system calms, they can finally move toward you without feeling trapped. An avoidant's biggest fear is not love. It's the feeling of being consumed by love. They fear expectations they can't meet. They fear being responsible for someone else's emotions. They fear conflict, emotional intensity, and the sense that closeness means they will lose freedom or identity. So when you chase, when you text more, explain more, ask for clarity, ask for reassurance, ask for commitment, your nervous system might think you're fighting for the relationship. But their nervous system reads it like a tightening rope. They don't hear, "I care." They hear, "I'm about to be required." They don't hear, "Let's communicate." They hear, "I'm about to be trapped in feelings." They don't hear, "Can you reassure me?" They hear, "I'm about to fail and be judged." So they pull away. Not always because they don't want you, but because their body is trying to escape discomfort. Withdrawal becomes their way to breathe again. Now here's the twist. When you finally give up, the rope loosens. When you stop sending the extra messages, they feel less cornered. When you stop trying to fix the silence, they feel less monitored. When you stop demanding emotional performance, they feel less inadequate. Your giving up removes the pressure that made closeness feel dangerous. And the moment closeness stops feeling dangerous, their attraction can resurface without panic. This is why avoidants often come back, right after you change your energy, not right after you change your words. You could have said all the right things for months, and nothing changed. Then you go quiet, you detach, you focus on your life, and suddenly they're curious again. Because your detachment communicates one powerful message without a single sentence. You're not responsible for regulating me anymore. For an avoidant, that feels like relief. Relief is seductive. Relief feels like safety. Relief feels like control returning. Relief feels like the relationship can exist without emotional intensity. So the avoidant's nervous system shifts from threat mode to curiosity mode. They start thinking about you again, not through fear, but through space. Space allows desire. Space allows longing. Space allows them to miss you without the pressure of having to meet you emotionally in the moment. When you were chasing, the avoidant could stay in defense. They could focus on what they feared: your needs, your emotions, the potential conflict, the feeling of being accountable. But when you stop chasing, their brain has nothing to push against. The problem disappears. The urgency disappears. The emotional noise quiets down. And in that quiet, the real feelings can finally be felt. Because many avoidants don't process emotions in real time. They process after distance creates safety. They feel love most clearly when you're not right in front of them needing something. That's why they can be warm after a break, but cold in the relationship. It's not because they're fake. It's because closeness floods them and distance regulates them. So when you give up, distance increases, regulation returns, and then feelings rise. That's Keynote 1. Pressure was the trigger, and your giving up removes it. But you must understand the danger hidden inside this. Their return at this stage is often not because they suddenly became emotionally mature. It's because they feel safer again. Safer doesn't mean healed. Safer doesn't mean ready. Safer just means the alarm stopped ringing. And when the alarm stops ringing, they can approach. This is why you might see them return with casual contact first. A hey, a meme, a like, a small check-in. They're testing the temperature. They're making sure the rope is still loose. They're checking whether you're still warm and reachable, without demanding anything. If you respond with the old anxious energy, overly available, overly emotional, overly eager, They feel the rope tighten again. Then they disappear again. The cycle restarts. So the real power of giving up is not the silence itself. The power is your internal shift. You stop being urgent. You stop being reactive. You stop making them the center of your emotional world. That shift makes you calmer. It makes you less demanding without trying. It makes your energy feel safer. And ironically, that's when avoidants are most drawn back in. Because an avoidant can tolerate love when it feels like choice, not obligation. They can tolerate closeness when it feels light, not heavy. They can tolerate connection when it doesn't come with panic. So when you give up, you're not casting a spell. You're removing pressure. You're changing the nervous system environment. And in that new environment, the avoidant can finally feel the pull toward you without immediately feeling the need to run. When you give up on an avoidant, the second keynote is that you collapse the power dynamic that kept them comfortable control through distance. In most avoidant, anxious loops, the avoidant doesn't always control you with intention, but they do control the rhythm of the relationship through one simple move: withdrawal. They pull back, and the other person reaches forward. They go quiet, and the other person explains. They get cold, and the other person warms harder. That chase becomes the engine of the connection. And as long as that engine runs, the avoidant never has to fully show up, because your chasing keeps the bond alive. So when you finally give up, you don't just stop texting. You stop feeding the engine. And that's when everything shifts. Distance is the avoidant's strongest leverage, because it regulates them and destabilizes you. When they withdraw, they feel relief. They feel control returning. They feel safe again. But you, on the other side, often feel uncertainty. You feel the bond slipping. Your nervous system gets activated. You start searching for clarity. You start reaching out. And every time you reach out, you unintentionally reinforce the rule of the relationship. When I withdraw, they come closer. That rule gives the avoidant a powerful comfort. They can take space without losing you. They can avoid difficult conversations without consequences. They can be inconsistent and still remain the emotional center of your mind. That is the push-pull power dynamic. Not power as in cruelty. Power as in control of access. The avoidant has the ability to turn the connection on and off, and you become the one waiting. Waiting for the next text. Waiting for the next warm moment. Waiting for the next sign that things are okay. And the more you wait, the more you revolve. And the more you revolve, the less the avoidant feels the true cost of their withdrawal. Until you give up. When you truly give up, you stop revolving. You stop monitoring. You stop negotiating your worth. You stop proving you're safe. You stop chasing closure. And the moment you stop chasing, their withdrawal loses its power. Because withdrawal only works as leverage when someone is still emotionally attached to the outcome. The avoidance distance is only control if you respond with pursuit. The moment you respond with calm detachment, no drama, no begging, no panic, the avoidance nervous system experiences something new. Withdrawal doesn't produce the old result anymore. They pull away and you don't chase. That silence hits them differently. Not because you're playing a game, but because you're finally stepping out of the role they unconsciously relied on. You are no longer the one who keeps the bridge standing alone. This is where the avoidant's internal stability gets shaken. Because many avoidants are secretly comforted by knowing you're still there, still caring, still reachable. Even if they complain about pressure, they often like the certainty of your availability. It soothes their fear of being abandoned. It gives them emotional security without requiring emotional effort. But when you stop chasing, that certainty disappears. Now they are the one facing uncertainty. And uncertainty is a trigger. It activates their fear of loss, their fear of missing out, their fear that they miscalculated. They start asking themselves questions they didn't have to ask when you were chasing. What if they're really done? What if I can't pull them back? What if someone else takes my place? What if I lost my safe person? The power dynamic flips, not because you manipulated it, but because you removed the guarantee. This is why avoidants often come back right after you stop chasing. Because your detachment forces reality. It forces them to feel consequence. They can't rely on your pursuit to keep the bond alive. And suddenly, they have to decide, do they step forward, or do they lose you? But here's the deeper part. Giving up also changes how you show up if they return. When you're no longer chasing, you don't respond like someone who is grateful for crumbs. You respond like someone who has standards. Your energy becomes calmer, clearer, more self-respecting. And that energy is deeply destabilizing to an avoidant who is used to controlling closeness through distance. Because now, if they return, they can't return to the old system. The old system was they withdraw, you chase, they return, you forgive, and nothing changes. The new system becomes they withdraw, you detach, they return, and you require repair. That requirement is what they fear and also what they need. This is why you may notice their return becomes more testing at first. They might send a casual message to see if they still have access. They might drop a breadcrumb, just enough to reopen the door. They're checking whether the old power dynamic still works. If you respond with immediate emotional flooding, they relax, because it means they still control the rhythm. If you respond with calm clarity, warm, but not wide open, they feel the shift. They realize access is no longer free. And this is where you must understand the difference between someone coming back for control and someone coming back for connection. A control-based return is vague, inconsistent, low effort. It's designed to re-establish your emotional availability without changing behavior. A connection-based return is clearer, more accountable, more consistent. It's willing to have the hard conversation, not just enjoy the comfort. So, keynote 2 is not just, they lose control. It's that the entire relationship stops being organized around their avoidance. It stops being organized around your pursuit. The chase dynamic dies, and when that chase dynamic dies, the avoidant finally has to face the real question. Do I actually want this person enough to show up differently? Or did I only want the reassurance of their pursuit? That's why giving up is so powerful. It doesn't force love. It reveals truth. It removes the leverage of distance and exposes what's underneath their real willingness, their real capacity, their real intention. Because when you stop chasing, you stop being controlled by the rhythm of their fear. And they can no longer hide behind withdrawal as their primary tool for keeping you close without being fully present. The third keynote is the delayed grief effect. Real loss hits avoidants late. Not because they're heartless, but because their nervous system processes pain differently. In the beginning, many avoidants don't collapse into sadness the way a more emotionally open person does. They detach, they distract, they go numb, they go practical. They tell themselves they're fine. They focus on work, routines, friends, anything that keeps them from feeling too much. That looks like moving on, but it's often just the first stage of their coping style. Shut down first, feel later. Avoidant grief is delayed because distance regulates them. When the relationship ends, their body finally gets relief from pressure. The conversations stop. The expectations stop. The emotional intensity stops. The "I need clarity" moments stop. Their nervous system exhales. And because they feel relief, they assume the breakup was the right choice. They confuse relief with certainty. They mistake the absence of pressure for happiness. For a while, they can even feel lighter, more in control, back in their safe zone. But relief is not healing. Relief is just the alarm turning off. Over time, the distractions start failing. The routines get quiet. The nights get longer. The little moments that used to be filled with your presence become empty spaces. And in that emptiness, the avoidant finally starts to feel what they couldn't feel when closeness was triggering them: attachment, grief, and the weight of what they lost. This is why the loss often hits in waves, not immediately. It hits when something reminds them of you in an ordinary way. A song, a place, a smell, a joke, a small detail. It hits when something stressful happens, and they reach for the person who used to calm them. Then remember you're not there. It hits when they accomplish something, and instinctively want to share it, then realize they can't. It hits when they see you doing fine without them. Because your stability becomes proof that you didn't need them to survive, and that triggers the fear that you might actually be gone for real. Avoidants often grieve through restlessness first. They may feel irritated, bored, unsettled. They may feel like nothing is satisfying them. They may scroll more, drink more, work more, flirt more. They keep trying to recreate the feeling of regulation they had with you. But nothing hits the same, because what you provided wasn't entertainment. It was emotional safety. That's when the grief deepens. Then comes the shame layer, and this is a major reason avoidant grief is complicated. Avoidants often carry hidden shame about emotional failure. They don't want to be seen as needy, messy, or not good at love. So when they start missing you, they don't just miss you. They also start confronting the possibility that they mishandled something important. They start replaying moments where you reached out and they withdrew. Moments where you asked for clarity and they avoided. Moments where you wanted repair and they went silent. And that replay can feel brutal because it threatens the identity they depend on. I'm fine. I'm in control. I don't need anyone. So instead of admitting grief openly, they often fight it. They tell themselves you were the problem. They try to focus on your flaws. They try to justify the breakup again. But the body doesn't care about the story. The body remembers safety. The body remembers calm. The body remembers connection. And the longer you're gone, the more that memory becomes loud. This is why avoidants often come back after a delay, not immediately. They come back when their nervous system has had enough quiet to feel the loss. They come back when the relief fades and reality arrives. They come back when the distractions no longer cover the emptiness. They come back when they realize the relationship wasn't just pressure, it was comfort too. And now the comfort is missing. They also come back because they realize something else. Loss is permanent when the other person truly detaches. In the early phase after a breakup, many avoidants assume you will eventually reach out again. They assume the door stays open. They assume you'll miss them, chase closure, or try to fix it. That assumption keeps them calm. It's like emotional insurance. But when you give up, that insurance disappears. And then grief becomes real. That's why your silence is so loud to them. Not because it's a tactic, but because it removes the fantasy that they can return anytime. It forces them to face the possibility that they lost access for good. And for an avoidant, losing access to a person who made them feel safe is a deep, delayed heartbreak. But here's what you must remember: delayed grief doesn't automatically equal readiness. Missing you is not the same as being able to show up differently. Grief can make them reach out. Shame can make them hover. Loneliness can make them test. But none of that guarantees they have the skills to sustain closeness. So keynote 3 is about understanding timing. Avoidants often feel relief first and grief later. They often detach first and process later. They often look fine until the quiet catches them. And when the quiet catches them, the loss finally lands not as a thought, but as a full body realization that the person who made them feel regulated is no longer available. That's when they start missing you for real, not because you begged them to, but because the absence of your presence becomes the loudest truth they can no longer avoid. When you give up, your self-respect becomes magnetic, and not because you're playing a game, but because you finally stop bleeding your power on someone who was living off your chasing. Most avoidants don't come back because you proved your love. They come back because your energy shifts from pleading to presence, from chasing to calm, from trying to be chosen to choosing yourself. And for an avoidant nervous system, that shift is shocking, because they are used to one thing: distance creating pursuit. They're used to pulling back and watching you lean in. They're used to silence making you talk more. They're used to your anxiety turning into effort. And that effort, even if it came from love, sent a hidden message. I will stay available no matter what you do. That message is comforting for an avoidant, because it removes the fear of losing you. But it's also dangerous, because it teaches them they can keep you without showing up. Then you give up, and suddenly that comfort disappears. You stop explaining. You stop checking. You stop trying to fix the mood. You stop asking questions that only lead to vague answers. You stop being the one who always comes back first. And the avoidant feels it. They might not admit it, but they feel the loss of your emotional labor. Because your emotional labor was part of the relationship's stability. You were the one absorbing uncertainty, absorbing inconsistency, absorbing distance. When you stop absorbing it, the relationship doesn't just feel quieter. It feels different. It feels like they can't control the connection anymore. Now your self-respect becomes the new signal. Self-respect is not coldness. Self-respect is not revenge. Self-respect is a calm refusal to beg for what should be given freely. Self-respect is you no longer auditioning for basic care. Self-respect is you saying, through your behavior, I'm not available for crumbs. And that energy hits avoidance in a way people don't expect. Because avoidants are often drawn to what feels safe and solid, not what feels needy and reactive. When you stop chasing, you become solid. You become the person who can walk away. You become the person who can be okay without them. You become the person who won't collapse. You become the person who won't fight for a bond that keeps injuring you. And that can trigger something deep inside them: respect. Not the shallow respect of ego. The nervous system respect of, this person is stable. This person has standards. This person won't tolerate chaos. And suddenly, you're not just someone they can access whenever they feel lonely. You're someone they could actually lose. That's why your glow-up works, even when you do nothing dramatic. Sometimes you don't even change your appearance. You change your posture. You stop over-explaining. You stop being overly available. You stop making your whole day revolve around whether they respond. You start living like a person who is already whole. And that wholeness is magnetic, because it feels like freedom instead of pressure. Ladies and gentlemen, avoidants are addicted to control, but they are also attracted to strength. Your chasing gave them control. Your self-respect gives you strength. And strength is rare. Because most people, when they love, panic, they over-invest. They over-function. They try to save the connection from dying by pouring more and more into it. But an avoidant doesn't experience that as romance. They experience it as pressure. They experience it as responsibility they didn't ask for. They experience it as emotional weight. So they pull away. But when you stop doing that, when you finally say, I'm done carrying this alone, the pressure drops. The relationship becomes lighter. And the avoidant can finally feel the part they were avoiding: the value of what you brought. You were the safe place. You were the steady one. You were the person who repaired, who tried, who softened, who stayed kind. You were the emotional home base they leaned on without admitting it. When you give up, they lose access to that. And losing access forces clarity. This is why your self-respect can make them return, but not always for the reasons you want. Sometimes they come back because they genuinely miss you and realize they mishandled something real. But sometimes they come back because your self-respect threatens their sense of access. They don't like the idea that you're no longer waiting. They don't like the idea that you're no longer affected. They don't like the idea that the bond no longer belongs to them by default. So your self-respect becomes a test. It tests whether they want you for connection or for control. It tests whether they're returning for repair or for relief. It tests whether they can meet your standards or only miss your availability. And this is where you must stay grounded. Because the moment you break yourself, respect to welcome them back, the old dynamic reactivates. They learn I can still pull them back with minimal effort. And then the cycle repeats. So the real power of Keynote 4 is not self-respect makes them chase. The real power is self-respect changes what you accept. It makes your love cleaner. It makes your boundaries real. It makes you stop calling inconsistency love just because you miss them. When you give up, you stop being a guarantee. You stop being a convenience. You become a choice that must be earned through consistency. And for an avoidant who is used to love being available, no matter how they behave, that shift feels like gravity. It pulls their attention back to you, not because you begged, but because you finally showed them something they can't ignore. You have a life, a spine, and a standard. And access to you is not automatic anymore. When an avoidant comes back after you give up, the most dangerous misunderstanding is thinking their return automatically means growth. A lot of avoidants don't return because they suddenly learned emotional maturity overnight. They return because your absence created discomfort, and contact with you reduces that discomfort. That's why Keynote 5 matters more than all the others. Because this is the stage where you can get pulled back into the same cycle, only deeper, only more exhausting, only more confusing. They come back for relief. Relief from guilt. Relief from loneliness. Relief from the uncomfortable silence that finally forced them to feel. Relief from the anxiety that rose when they realized you might actually be gone. Relief from the shame of knowing they mishandled something real. Relief from the loss of control they used to have through distance. And the fastest way for them to get relief is not therapy, not accountability, not repair. The fastest way is you. A single reply from you can calm their nervous system. A warm conversation can soften their shame. Your openness can erase the consequences. Your kindness can make them feel like they're not the villain. That's why some avoidants return with sudden sweetness, sudden nostalgia, sudden, I miss you, sudden, I've been thinking. It can feel romantic, like the movie moment you've been waiting for. But under the romance, there's often a hidden motive: regulate the discomfort. Then retreat once the discomfort fades. This is why their return can be intense at first. They message more. They respond faster. They act more present. Not always because they're ready, but because the fear of losing you is high. The panic makes them pursue. And when panic fuels pursuit, the pursuit can look like love. But panic love is unstable. The moment they feel secure again, their old fear of closeness wakes back up. Fear of expectations, fear of accountability, fear of being emotionally responsible, and they start pulling back again. That's the relief trap. They return, you soften, they feel safe, and then they withdraw. If you've ever experienced this, you know how brutal it is. Because the second time hurts differently. The first time you thought they didn't understand. The second time you realize they understood enough to come back, and still didn't stay consistent. That's why you must learn to identify the difference between relief and repair. Relief focuses on reconnection without accountability. Repair focuses on rebuilding safety through responsibility. Relief sounds like, I miss you, but avoids the hard conversation. Repair sounds like, I hurt you. I want to understand your experience. Relief sounds like, let's not talk about the past. Repair sounds like, we need to talk about what happened so it doesn't repeat. Relief sounds like, can we just start fresh? Repair sounds like, what standards do we need so this is healthy? Relief is chemistry. Repair is consistency. Relief is them wanting access to you again. Repair is them changing the behaviors that made you give up in the first place. So when they come back, your job is not to punish them, not to act cold, not to make them beg. Your job is to stay calm and require clarity. Because clarity is what separates a real return from a nervous system relapse. You can be warm, but you don't become wide open. You don't pour your whole heart into the first message. You don't reward breadcrumbs with intimacy. You don't rush back into the relationship because the loneliness of missing them is loud. You slow it down, you make it real. A grounded response looks like, I'm open to talking. If we reconnect, I need consistency, communication, and repair. Are you willing to do that? That sentence is not an ultimatum. It's a filter. It forces the return to reveal itself. Because avoidants who come back for relief will often resist structure. They will avoid defining anything. They will keep it vague. They will want emotional comfort without emotional responsibility. They will try to slide back into the old access, late night texting, flirty nostalgia, quick reconnection, without addressing the damage. And if you allow that, you become their emotional medication again. You become the thing they use to calm the discomfort of consequences. They feel empty, they check in. They feel guilty, they flirt. They feel lonely, they reopen the door. They feel fear of loss, they offer just enough warmth to keep you from closing it. But they don't do the one thing that would actually change their life: sustained repair. Repair is not one apology. Repair is a pattern. It's them showing up when it's uncomfortable. It's them communicating before disappearing. It's them taking accountability without blaming your needs. It's them being consistent after the honeymoon moment fades. So the danger stage is this: you will feel the old hope rise again, and hope can make you ignore evidence. Hope can make you accept half returns. Hope can make you settle for, they're trying, without real change. Hope can make you abandon your own standards, because you don't want to lose them again. That's why the strongest move is calm consequence, not emotional negotiation. If they return and then begin the old pattern, vague, hot, and cold, disappearing, your response isn't to chase. Your response is to step back again, even if it hurts. Because stepping back protects the part of you that finally learned how to choose peace. And the moment you require repair, you will see the truth. Some avoidants will rise because they finally realize access to you is not free. Others will retreat because they never wanted repair, they wanted relief, and when relief requires responsibility, they decide it's too much. Not because you asked for too much, but because they were still trying to keep love without accountability. They come back only if you're still reachable, and your boundary decides the ending. That's the sixth keynote, and it's the one that turns this whole topic from how to get them back into how to protect your life. Because the truth is, an avoidant returning is not the victory. The victory is what happens next. The real ending is determined by what you require after the return, not by how emotional they feel in the return. When you give up, you create consequence. Consequence is what wakes them up. But if they come back and you remove the consequence instantly, by giving full access, full warmth, full intimacy, full forgiveness with no structure, you teach the nervous system a dangerous rule. I can leave, and nothing changes. That rule recreates the cycle. It guarantees another disappearance. Because the avoidant learns they can regulate themselves through withdrawal and still keep you as the safe place waiting. So the boundary is everything. A boundary is not a threat. It's a standard you live by. It's the difference between love and self-abandonment. And the boundary that decides your ending is simple access to, you must be earned through consistency and repair. If they return with breadcrumbs, you don't eat crumbs. If they return with nostalgia, you don't confuse nostalgia with commitment. If they return with, I miss you, you don't mistake missing you for being ready. You respond with calm clarity. You can be kind, because kindness is your character. But you must be structured, because structure is your protection. You can say, I'm open to a real conversation. If we reconnect, I need consistency, communication, and repair. I'm not doing hot and cold again. That sentence is not you trying to control them. That sentence is you telling your nervous system, I won't betray you anymore. And that boundary forces truth, because avoidance can return for many reasons, loneliness, guilt, jealousy, fear of loss, missing your comfort. But only growth can sustain a relationship. And growth always shows up in behavior. Behavior looks like them having the hard conversation without running. Behavior looks like them acknowledging impact without blaming your needs. Behavior looks like them making clear plans instead of vague messages. Behavior looks like them following through when things feel ordinary, not just when panic is high. Behavior looks like them repairing after conflict within a reasonable time, not disappearing. So your boundaries should be focused on behaviors, not promises. Promises are easy in emotion. Behavior is hard in reality. That's why you don't ask, "Do you love me?" You ask, "What will be different?" You don't accept, "I'll try." You ask, "How will we handle space next time?" You don't accept, "Let's start fresh." You ask, "What accountability are you taking for what happened?" And here's where many people get scared. They think requiring these things will push the avoidant away. Sometimes it will. And if it does, that is information, not tragedy. Because the avoidant who runs from accountability was not coming back to build something healthy. They were coming back to reduce discomfort. They were coming back to regain access. They were coming back to see if the door was still open. Your boundary closes the door to the cycle, while leaving the door open to growth. That's the perfect balance. You're not punishing them. You're not being cruel. You're simply refusing to return to a dynamic that costs you your peace. Now here is the hardest part, holding the boundary when your emotions rise. Because when they return, your heart wants to rush. Your heart wants to believe. Your heart wants to feel chosen. Your heart wants to stop the ache. And that's why people break their own standards. They accept early sweetness as proof. They accept attention as change. They accept chemistry as commitment. And then, weeks later, the avoidant withdraws again, and the heartbreak is worse, because now you feel like you betrayed yourself. So the boundary must be lived, not spoken. If they disappear again, you step back again. If they become vague again, you stop engaging in vagueness. If they want access without repair, you withdraw your access, and you do it calmly. No lectures, no drama, calm consequence. This is what makes the ending clear, because there are only two possible endings once you hold the boundary. Ending 1, they grow. They face discomfort. They learn emotional tolerance. They become consistent. They accept standards. They repair. They show up steadily. They don't just come back, they stay back. This is the rare but beautiful outcome. And it happens when an avoidant actually chooses to evolve, not just to return. Ending 2, they retreat. They resist accountability. They keep trying to return in half steps. They keep hovering. They keep testing access, and your boundary makes it impossible for them to stay in the cycle with you. So they fade. Not because you weren't lovable, but because you stopped being available for inconsistency. That's why your boundary decides the ending. Not their tears, not their apology, not their sudden messages at midnight, not their, "I miss you." The ending is decided by what you require to stay connected. And if you want the most powerful truth of all, whether they come back or not, your boundary restores your life. Because the moment you stop being reachable for emotional neglect, you stop living in waiting mode. You stop living in hope mode. You stop living in panic mode. You return to yourself. So yes, avoidants often come back when you give up. But the real question is not, will they come back? The real question is, what will you do when they do? And the healthiest, strongest answer is this: you will not trade your peace for their temporary closeness. You will not reopen your heart without consistent behavior. You will not accept relief returns. You will only accept repair, because you are not here to repeat the same lesson. Your boundary is the lesson.